The demonic dragon Shidou Ryusei teams up with the Japanese celestial Sae Shidou to go 2-on-2 against the team of the producer of destruction Hiori and the demon king Isagi Yoichi, a fight like none you've seen thus far. Because this is a battle between two demonic destroyers and two of the best orchestrators in Blue Lock. And so in today's video we are going to look at each duo's weapons, their playing style and how they mash together in order to determine who is the most overpowered duo in Blue Lock. Now, before we actually start with the players, I gotta say that usually for one-on-one matchups, I go over each player's stats and then their weapons, abilities and playing style in general. However, seeing that this matchup is all about teamwork and how the duo can function together, I am going to skip talking about the physical aspect. And in fact, I am going to skip a lot of weapons that the players have as well. Instead, I will be focusing on the weapons that help the duo thrive together and beat the other alliance. However, with this out of the way, let's jump right into the video. Hiori, the zombie slayer, the producer of destruction, and Isagi's right-hand man. One of the most intriguing characters in Blue Lock because of the nature of his ego. Even though he is one of the best egoists in the show, Hiori's whole existence is about calmly finding the most efficient, most optimal and hard to defend against play. Which unironically is what today's matchup is all about, finding the most optimal route in order to score a goal. However, Hiori's approach to that is rather interesting, because even though his ego is really big, his tenacity is very tame, and as such, Hiori is one of the calmest, most easygoing players in the show. But don't let his demeanor fool you. Hiori has one of the best technical eyes in the show, as most of the times he impulsively knows what's the right answer to any situation he finds himself in. And in doing so, most of the times Hiori completely ignores the striker's playing style, their strong and weak points, and rather focuses on advancing the most optimal play. Which I know might sound as a weakness or it makes Hiori kind of a premier midfielder, it actually fits perfectly with Isagi's playing style, as I will explain in a second when we reach him. For now, just know that Hiori's ability to visualize the most optimal route towards the goal is one of the best in the show. However, as you all know, IDs are not enough in Blue Lock. In fact, the player needs a perfect way to materialize his image. And for that reason, Hiori possesses one of the craziest passes in Blue Lock. In fact, they are very accurate, but funny enough, they are not accurate to fit with any player, but rather Hiori is always trying to snipe the most optimal route. And again, this fits very well with Isagi, to the point I am starting to think they were made for each other. However, let's not get ahead of ourselves and actually carry on with Hiori's passes. Because you see, accurate is not all there is to them. Hiori delivers one of the most insane trajectory we've seen in Blue Lock, and his angles are often near impossible, which is actually a very good weapon to have for an attacking midfielder, because this means that his passes are very hard to deal with, and are really hard to intercept by the defenders, and so when coupling this with his insane accuracy, his passes are rather scary. However, if I had to point out, one thing that I don't like about his passes is actually his versatility. You see, because he always focuses on the most optimal route, Hiori never found himself needing to change his passes that much to fit with the strikers, and for that reason, versatility really suffered. However, for today's matchup, that doesn't really matter that much, because simply put, the harder the pass is, the more it favors Isagi's direct shot more than the defenders intercepting it, and so this weakness has no effect on today's matchup whatsoever. And also, the hard angles his passes take make them very hard to read for defenders with no insane perception, which again serves Isagi very well. However, and speaking of perception, Hiori's technical eye is not just about the optimal plays or what is happening on the pitch, but also his eyes are very good at reading people, which actually will prove to be very crucial in today's matchup, because it will help him understand the Demon King better. And in fact, the first time we've seen Hiori's eagle eye in action when dissecting players, it was unironically with Isagi in the third selection. And then in the Uber's game, things came full circle, with Isagi this time choosing Hiori. However, let's get back to Hiyori's eyes. As you see, there's still a weapon that we did not talk about, despite it being Hiyori's strongest ability, which is of course Metavision. Now, for those living under a rock, Metavision is an ocular ability where the player utilizes his peripheral vision in order to take in everything that is happening in his field of view. Furthermore, the player shakes his head in all directions in order to widen that field of view, making it as if the player has a bird's eye view of everything happening around him, which honestly, every time I explain it, I think of just how busted this ocular ability is. As for Hiyori's, his Metavision is very OP. I would say that he gets beaten by quite a few characters in field readability, but he is very close to the highest of levels in terms of his Metavision. And honestly, his perception feats are among the best we've seen thus far. However, as I said, in a lot of instances, he got beaten by other characters like Charles and Karasu. And to be honest, this doesn't happen often, but judging by the high stakes in today's matchup, this is a weakness that is worth noting. However, what Hiyori lacks in Metavision more than compensates for with his technical eye. As I said before, his ability to instantly and perfectly assess what needs to be done at any given point is honestly rather scary. And if you think about it, this is a genius-like trait. Even though we know Hiyori is a talented learner, this weapon honestly feels as if it belongs to a genius. And I don't know, for me, this feels as if it is a primitive version of Noah's rational eye, where the latter has an impeccable ability to assess every situation rationally, which is kinda the same for Hiyori. However, I don't think it is on the same level. But be it as it may be, this weapon will prove very crucial in today's matchup, because Hiyori's partner today evolves like crazy every time, and so an ability that allows Hiyori to match him up is definitely one of the most important weapons for today's matchup. And I feel like the writer kinda hinted at that before the Nigerian game, where Isagi demanded that Hiyori evolves his passes to meet the new height Isagi achieved. And I honestly feel like in the stress of a very tough game, I have no doubt that Hiyori can evolve and match Isagi very easily. However, that's not the only reason for why this ability will prove crucial in today's matchup. Because you see, when you couple this technical eye with Hiyori's Metavision, it becomes very easy for him to meet Isagi in the most optimal spot on the pitch repeatedly. And actually, this interaction specifically is a shared weapon between the duo today, which is the no vision connection pass, where by completely ignoring each other and meeting in the most optimal spot, both Isagi and Hiyori will see the same thing and both will go for the same vision. Hiyori will pass and Isagi will shake off the defenders, enabling them to score a goal. And honestly, this has to be the most insane weapon for any duo to pull off, because nothing really matches the level of coordination needed, and also nothing matches the level of threat this weapon creates. And so, as I said, it is one of the most OP weapons a team can pull off. However, meeting Isagi at the most optimal spot requires more than just visualizing the most rational path. Because, as I said, while Isagi needs to get rid of the defenders on him, Hiyori also must give himself this space in order to deliver his pass at the perfect timing. And for that, Hiyori's dribbling fits perfectly in his arsenal. Because you see, it's one of the trickiest dribbling abilities in Blue Lock, and that's mainly because it is reactive. However, unlike other reactive dribblers, where they change the techniques depending on what the defenders do, Hiyori's dribbling is all about changing the rhythm and the tempo of his moves, making it the perfect weapon to throw off the defenders for a split second, where Hiyori can easily deliver one of his signature passes. And honestly, we've seen this shit work like a charm for Hiyori, not only against strong players like Nico and Karasu, but also against the best defender in the show, Don Lorenzo. And again, what makes it work like a charm is that at a certain point, Hiyori doesn't need to penetrate, and so a dribbling that gives him the space is all he needs in order to deliver his passes. And honestly, when put together, this weapon completes the full package for an attacking midfielder, making Hiyori the real deal and the perfect partner for Isagi today. However, on that note, it's time for us to explore the Demon King. Starting up straight with the most obvious one, since I've been talking about Isagi and Hiori meeting at the most optimal spot, it is only natural to talk about Isagi's meta vision. Not only that, but I feel like at the same time we need to talk about his insane off-the-ball movements. You see, to be honest with you guys, this matchup would not be fair if not for these two weapons. Because think about it, there aren't better abilities than these two when it comes to connecting with the midfielders. As for Isagi's meta vision, there aren't really many players who are on his level, with maybe the exception being Karasu and Kaiser, who seem to function on the same level as Isagi. And of course there is Charles, who remains the only player who beat him multiple times. And this for us means that when it comes to reading the field and seeing what's actually happening on it, Isagi is definitely among the best to ever do it, to the point he really impressed Snuffy in this point specifically. However, and let's be honest, it gets disturbingly OP when you look at his meta vision in tandem with some other small but very fitting weapons. However, before I get carried out, let's actually talk about the other weapon I mentioned, his off-the-ball movements, and then from there we can get to the small weapons that Isagi added to his meta vision. Now, ever since the introduction of Ren, off-the-ball movements have been one of the most crucial weapons for all strikers. The ability to position yourself in favorable spots to score has to be one of the most important skills for any striker. I mean, even players who are typically all about playing with the ball like Baro and Yuki learned the hard way that it is crucial, or rather imperative, to learn to position themselves better. And when it comes to this specifically, meta vision goes a long way in enabling Isagi to position himself perfectly every time. Because with it, Isagi can know with certainty what's the most optimal spot to target on the pitch, making him by default one of the most threatening players in the U20 category, because he will always position himself in the most dangerous spots. And I mean, if he has nothing else, this alone goes a huge mile into making him scary. However, and of course, it doesn't stop here with Isagi. You see, despite how OP his movements are, almost every other meta vision user can see the same as Isagi. Hell, even other geniuses like Renan Lorenzo can sense the most critical spot on the pitch. And so what makes Isagi's movements scarier than say Kaiser for example is actually his off-the-ball dueling ability, which funny enough we've seen him adapt from Naruhaya back in the second selection. However, this weapon never really shined as much as it does right now until Isagi unlocked meta vision. Think about it as two jigsaw pieces completing each other. Off-the-ball movements gets you to the perfect spot, and off-the-ball dueling gets you through the defenders. And together, if you think about it, make Isagi the perfect striker for Hiori, as every time Hiori goes for the most optimal play, Isagi will definitely meet him there. A perfect transition from a midfielder to a striker, if I say so myself. But as I promised, let's get back to meta vision and talk about the two additive weapons Isagi has that makes his field readability and IQ without a doubt the best we've seen in the U20 category. The first weapon is the protagonist feeling, which allows Isagi to read the motives of both allies and enemies alike, to actually figure out what each player is thinking and what each player is aiming for. And with it, not only can Isagi see everything around him, but he also knows the motive of every player in his field of vision. And so predicting their next moves become much easier for the Demon King. Moreover, this actually makes it very easy for him to understand Hiori perfectly. However, and even though this is OP on itself, Isagi took it to the next step with the second weapon I want to talk about, which is the fastest piece. And honestly here, I don't even know where to begin with. This is such a simple but such a destructive weapon that Isagi acquired, because it almost allows him to foresee the future. And honestly, this is the closest we are going to get to the Emperor Eye in Blue Lock. However, what this weapon entails is that by forcing himself to predict what's about to happen and then moving before the play is even conceived, Isagi becomes the fastest to react to any given situation, simply because he is not actually reacting, but rather he is moving before the play even happens. And this is possible due to the previous weapons. You see, after analyzing the field with meta vision and understanding everyone's motives with the protagonist feeling, Isagi more often than not can predict what's about to happen. happen, and thus by moving before the play is even conceived, he becomes faster than everyone. Even speedsters or players with perfect reaction time get beaten by this weapon specifically, because simply put, reacting to any play can never beat predicting the play. And I know Isagi can't really predict the future and he could be wrong at some times, but because of the protagonist feeling, Isagi is more than not successful in predicting what's about to happen, making him what's probably the best pure striker in the U20 category. In fact, let's dive even deeper into why Isagi can predict the future. You see, even though this is not a weapon, it is a trait that he actually acquired after Noah's betrayal. And in total irony, it is a trait that Noah excels at. I think honestly no one is better than him in this point specifically, which is actually being emotionless, because Noah and Isagi now don't have any biases on the pitch, meaning that much like Noah, Isagi now aims for whatever is best. Wherever play has the best chance of leading to a goal, Isagi will meet it there, which in matches with the highest of levels, of course the most optimal play gets carried out. And so by taking everything into account and being emotionless about it, Isagi can predict with almost a perfect score what's about to happen, and thus he moves before everyone else reacts to the play, which ironically this completely nullifies his weak speed stat, as now he can take even the fastest of players by surprise. And honestly, every time I talk about this, I get reminded of Snuffy, how a talented learner with simple weapons made geniuses fall to their knees. And honestly, I find it very intriguing that Isagi is following on Noah's footsteps. However, and I feel like even though these weapons are insane, especially when they are used together, they all pale in comparison to Isagi's strongest weapon, which is of course his adaptability. His ability to devour allies and enemies alike, to morph and evolve with each play he witnesses, is definitely Isagi's strongest weapon. And honestly, it was the one that carried him ever since the beginning of Blue Lock. Every time there is an obstacle to beat, Isagi is the best man because of his adaptability. And honestly, I feel like it might prove to be the hardest weapon for Sae Shidou to contend with, because it would be hard to beat someone who will always adapt to whatever you're doing. However, and obviously this weapon has a lot of limitations, but it remains one of the most OP weapons ever. However, where adaptability holds every weapon Isagi has together, what actually wraps them together nicely is his shooting ability, his direct shot. You see, Isagi has a very powerful and a very accurate shot when he is within range, which admittedly it is a very short range, especially when compared to the likes of Ring, Kaiser and Baro. However, think about it for a second. For a player that is as slippery as Isagi, a weapon that allows him to shoot as soon as he gets the ball is actually more crucial than range, power or even accuracy, because Isagi is always aiming to get himself free in front of the goalkeeper. His shots will do the job almost every time. In fact, even when he shoots with his weak leg, he still packs quite the punch. And actually that's the second trait to his shooting, is that Isagi actually can shoot with both legs. And even though his lefty shot is only 40% of his righty shot, as I said, because Isagi is most of the time very close to the goal, it's honestly insane how much it is effective. And honestly, because he is the adaptability demon, of course he was not just satisfied with shooting with both legs. Instead, he developed a technique where he can juggle in mid-air and change between the shooting leg, completely confusing any defender that lingered and was not shaken off by his off-the-ball movements, which overall makes Isagi one of the most threatening strikers in the show. As I said, I honestly believe he is the best pure striker in Blue Lock hands down. And when you couple him with such an insane of a midfielder like Hiori, you get one of the strongest duos in the show. However, can this destructive duo actually beat the destructive team of Sae and Shidou? Sae Itoshi, a man that only a handful of players have been hyped to his level. In fact, this man is so badass that hype follows everywhere his name goes. That's the way the writer hyped up Kaiser at the start of the NEL, and that's the way the writer is hyping up Bunny. However, and much like I did with Hiori, to start the character analysis, we gotta talk about the most prerequisite weapon for any attacking midfielder, which is of course the passing ability. And to be honest, when it comes to this, Sae is just scary, plain and simple. He has the highest accuracy among all the passers we've seen, with only Charles coming close due to the sniper eyes. But actually more on that in a second. For now, when talking about Sae's passing, you gotta understand he is just unbelievably accurate. He was able to target a very specific point where he was perfect for Shidou, yet at the same time impossible for Chigiri with all his insane speed. And to this day, no one has ever pulled something like this. We've seen other players squeeze their passes between defenders to reach their striker like Charles many times. However, what Sae did here honestly is on a league of its own. And as I said, with the exception to the Predator Eyes users, no one really pulled this level of accuracy, whether be it for passing or even shooting. However, this pass is so special because it wasn't just accuracy that was on full display. You see, what Sae basically did, he saw the defender move, he saw Chigiri sprint with all of his speed, then he tailored his pass so he can never reach it, but at the same time it would be perfect for Shidou, meaning not only can he tailor his pass for his striker, but also he can tailor it so the defenders find it very hard to deal with. Which, and if you could believe it, that's only half the story, because you see, Sae takes his striker's best weapons, weaknesses, and everything about them into consideration before making his passes. Meaning when it comes to reaching the striker, Sae's passes are the definition of perfection. Because unlike anyone else, his passes are tailored not only for his striker, but also they are very tailored to avoid the defenders. And to put things into perspective, Ness was considered to be one of the greats because his passes were completely perfect for Kaiser. The magician always tailored his pass to fit with whatever Kaiser was thinking. But honestly, Sae takes this to a whole different level by taking both sides of the war into account to truly deliver a perfectly tailored pass. But speaking of Ness, and because this is Blue Lock where nothing really goes as planned, other players started to understand that Ness's passes are perfect for Kaiser, and so they started employing countermeasures every time Ness gets the ball. However, because Ness is a genius, he found a solution. And this solution, or I should say the reason he attained a new level, was actually to deliver a pass that is impossibly hard for current Kaiser, but it is great and very fitting for the Kaiser that must evolve to meet it. In a sense, he gave him a pass that pushes the striker further. But, and this is where things get crazy with Sae. You see, the ultimate weapon for a midfielder at the end of the NEL was not actually a concept that was new for us, because we've seen the Itoshi Destroyer utilize it before. In fact, he did it many times, because going from the fact that Sae can easily understand his strikers, and because he is always trying to be the best midfielder, it was only natural for Sae to actually try and push his strikers forward. He did it with Sendo, and he was so out of his league to the point he started questioning what Sae is thinking, because the pass seemed to be doable but at the same time impossibly hard, and because Sendo is just shit, he failed at meeting it. But then of course we saw him utilize it with his partner today, Shidou, where Sae kept feeding him passes that pushed his playing style further, one after another, until the demon rose to the challenge and scored one hell of a goal. In fact, even Sae was not accounting for Shidou to evolve that hard. And honestly, I found it just funny how a huge weapon like this, how an ability that pushed Ness to the next level, is something that Sae was dishing out regularly at every turn. In fact, it was so seamless to him, he even did it with shit strikers like Sendo. However, and of course is the case, that's not everything to Sae's passing. Because you see, Sae presents one of the most versatile passing ability. He has one of the best path trajectory and pass delivery we've seen in Blue Lock as of yet. And again, at this point, he is only rivaled by Charles. And what I mean by that is Sae has shown us a lot of passing types, from long, short, soft, powerful, lobbed passes, and even ones with such curvature they seem to be completely out of aim. And mind you, he did all of this and was outside of everyone's comprehension without breaking a sweat, because delivering these insanely varying passes came naturally to him, which if you think about it could only mean that he still has a lot more variation in his arsenal, and what we've seen from him doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of his versatility. But of course, this remains only speculation. And honestly, speaking of speculation, I'd like to go back to Sae's passing accuracy and talk about what I alluded to when I said that Charles is the only one close to Sae. And here I am specifically talking about the sniper eyes, because you see, I am speculating that him and Charles present these very special eyes, and it is them that enable them to achieve such insane accuracy at a moment's notice. You can honestly think about them as the Predator eyes but for passing, because they help the player to instantly snipe the best passing course despite the chaos ensuing around him. However, not only that, but much like how Kaiser utilizes the Predator eyes to completely eliminate the noise, I feel like with how calm Sae is, his vision must have this feature as well. But also, much like how there was a lot to the Predator eyes than what we assumed at first, I feel like there is another ability to the Sniper eyes, which is specifically Sae altering his pass on a moment's notice once he saw Chigiri start to sprint. Because just like that, in an instant, he adjusted his pass to be perfect for Shidou, yet impossible for Chigiri. And I feel like this is such a broken ability that it kinda requires to be in a vision. However, beyond just this point, with the speculative eye, Sae overall becomes what kids call perfection personified. Like, I am yet to see a player born to be a passer like Sae. And honestly, what's even scarier is that right now he is a monster and we only spoke about a singular weapon, which is his passing ability. We are yet to delve into his other weapons, because frankly, having the ability to deliver insane passes would mean nothing without perfect positioning on the pitch. And for that reason, next I want to talk about Sae's insane field readability. And here of course, because it was confirmed by Isagi, everybody knows that Sae has metavision. However, where his eyes stand among the other U20 players, that honestly remains to be seen. I mean, for the very least, I think he should be on Kaiser's level, because they are both New Gen 11 and whatnot. However, there is no guarantee, and I'm not going to take the level of his metavision into account that much, because we honestly don't know his true level. But honestly, there is one little hint that could give us the level of his metavision, which is actually his opponent today, Isagi. Because you see, as I said in his portion, Isagi's metavision on its own is definitely on Kaiser, Karasu and Charles' level. However, when it is in tandem with his other weapons, I have yet to see a metavision that is better than Isagi, with the exception to Snuffy's. And actually, when we talk about those additive weapons, the fastest piece specifically, you will find something very interesting and one that would actually kinda help us in figuring out where Sae stands in terms of metavision. You see, the fastest piece was born after Isagi became completely emotionless. After adopting Noah's mantle, Isagi became like a machine on the pitch, taking everything at face value. And when I talk about the Demon King like this, I can't help but think about Sae and how emotionless he is on the pitch. I mean, to the point he doesn't even celebrate goals, because to him scoring must be a natural thing that occurs every time he plays. And for that reason, I feel like Sae's metavision might be the ascended vision Isagi attained at the end of the PXG game. Maybe not specifically on the fastest piece level, but at least on Demon King Isagi's level. However, enough about talking about his metavision's level. Let's actually talk about what this weapon enables Sae to do. You see, I honestly think it fits perfectly with his passing ability, as it allows him to target the most optimal spot to be in order to have the best passing chances as well as the best passing angle. But also it allows him to constantly know where his striker is standing, and also know the whereabouts of his defenders, what is happening on the pitch at every time, and what must be done in order to achieve victory. And I feel like it is fitting here for me to talk about the reflex meets reflex weapon that Sae and Shidou actually showed in the U20 game. You see, the weapon I explored with Isagi and Hiori actually was first demonstrated by Sae and Shidou. And I find it funny again how the strongest weapon in the Ubers game was something that Sae was dishing out effortlessly. It honestly puts into perspective just how crazy ahead of them he was at that game. However, and speaking of Hiori, much like I said in his part, how perfect positioning and perfect field readability often are not enough, and the midfielder needs an ability that allows him the space in order to deliver his passes. And for that, not only does Sae have a great well-rounded physicality that is on Rin's level, but more importantly, he has one of the craziest dribbling abilities we've seen in the show. And honestly, I find it kind of funny and interesting that much like Hiori again, Sae's dribbling ability is completely reactive. However, instead of reacting to the opponents by changing the tempo, Sae actually utilizes dribbling moves in order to elegantly but completely counter whatever the defender is doing. And this is possible because because Sae by his nature is very calculated. He is constantly calculating what is happening around him, which range from his passing targets to the defenders trying to stop him, making stopping him a very hard task indeed. Because through this dribbling, he can drive the attack to any point he likes or any point that fits with his striker before delivering one of his deadly passes, which makes this dribbling ability a weapon that fits perfectly with his passing, because not only does it give him the space he needs, but also it gives him the ability to force his way through to the most optimal spots from where he can deliver the best pass you ever see in your lives. Which honestly, when I talk like this, it truly makes him the perfect midfielder. Like when it comes to an attacking midfielder, Sae's weapon and whole existence is just about perfectly leading the forward line insane passes so they can score. However, for today's matchup, it's not going to be a forward line. Instead, it's going to be just one striker, Shidou Ryusei, the demonic dragon of Blue Lock. Now, I know I said that I don't need to talk about physicality in this matchup. However, I feel like an exception must be done for Shidou, because one aspect to his physicality is more than just that. It is at the core of his playing style in its entirety. And of course, here I'm talking about his agility and his jumping ability, which I gotta tell you, in these 2 points specifically, Shidou is one of the craziest strikers in Blue Lock. He might not jump the highest in the air and could be beaten by the likes of Aiko, Kunigami and Aryu. However, what he could do in the air is honestly just scary, and I feel like at this point specifically the only one comparable to him is without a doubt Nagi, where both not only can they jump very high, but also they do crazy stunts in the air, because they are crazy like that. And of course, this is all thanks due to his insane and honestly broken agility, which unironically is the core of half his playing style. Because you see, Shidou's whole existence is about exploding in the penalty box. Shidou has the ability to turn every opportunity in the penalty box into goals. Even loose balls and mistakes are not safe from this demonic dragon. And this point specifically is entirely due to his agility, because regardless of the quality of the pass, Shidou will pull some insane stunt and shoot the ball from a near impossible position, scoring amazing goals every time. However, let me ask you this. If he can do everything in the penalty box perfectly, that feels as if it's the complete package, right? Well, wrong, because Shidou needs to possess an ability that allows him to reach the penalty box and challenge in the first place. And for that reason, we gotta talk about the secondary weapon there is at the core of his playing style. And of course, you already know it, I'm talking about his off-the-ball movements. You see, unlike the other 3 players on today's list, Shidou lacks infield readability, yet he has insane off-the-ball movements and an insane ability to position himself perfectly. And if you could believe it, he does all of that instinctively, because Shidou is the true definition of a genius. And because his movements are completely instinctive, when it comes to reacting to any given ball, there is no one, and I mean no one, that can beat Shidou. I mean, sure, Isagi might move before him, however, as I said in the fastest piece, that's not actually reaction, but rather it is prediction. When it comes to purely reacting to any play, Shidou is honestly untouched. And with the exception to the pros, no one even comes close. I mean, we've seen him against Metavision users, where he was able to completely beat them simply because his movements were completely instinctive, while it might take them 0.1 second to actually process the information their Metavision enables. However, that's only one part of it, because when it comes to perfectly positioning himself, Shidou also has an instinctive ability to do that, and we've seen him times and times again be in the perfect position on the pitch despite him not even understanding why he is there, like it happened in the PXG game with Charles' pass. However, that's only the second part into this, because there is a third part, which is honestly rather scary. And here I'm talking about his ability to shake off almost any defender on him. And I know it is tied to his reaction, because he can react before they even move. However, it's not only that. Shidou, by his nature and by his instincts, know how to shake off any defender. While it took Isagi actually observing the ability before learning it, it comes naturally to Shidou. That's how broken his off-the-ball movements. He is undoubtedly one of the slipperiest strikers in Blue Lock right now, being able to shake off almost any defender, whether be it speedsters, high flyers, or whatever the case may be. However, and speaking of his movements being actually on Metavision's level, it actually makes his playing style very fitting with Metavision. In a general sense of course, but also very specifically with the reflex meeting reflex weapon, where as I've said before, we've seen him utilize this weapon with Sae. However, he also did it with Charles as the opener for the PXG game. And honestly there it was far more impressive, because we had Kaiser, we had Isagi and we had Hiori, yet no one was able to see that Shidou is capitalizing on the space left behind them when they are trying to tackle Ren. And honestly, it kinda was funny because Shidou himself did not expect it to come. He just ran where his instincts told him. And there he found Charles actually met him because he too was aiming for the empty space behind Ren. However, I hear you asking, if Shidou is this insane, if Shidou's instinctive plays are just the best there is, how can he actually be stopped? Well, here I gotta talk about a little weakness that he has. And I am saying a little weakness because by the end of this section, I don't think it quantifies as a real weakness. And here of course I am talking about man marking him by physically gifted players. We've seen Ryo being successful at stopping Shidou multiple times, and we've seen Kunigami completely dominate him for a good chunk of the PXG game. However, this is specifically why I say it's not really a weakness, because you see, even though Ryo did a great job at first, he eventually became unable to stop whatever Shidou was throwing, and I feel like Ryo there got completely overwhelmed. Sure, he could copy other players in order to stop Shidou with brute force. However, thanks to his insane off-the-ball movements and thanks to his insane agility, Ryo found the hard way that stopping Shidou is a very hard task. However, I feel like Kunigami fared much better, although for a shorter period. And what I mean by that is that Kunigami completely decimated Shidou, with the latter not even touching the ball once. However, that was extremely taxing on Kunigami's body. Yes, the bulky man Kunigami got exhausted from trying to keep Shidou on a leash. And this is the beauty of it. The whole PXG game was about 30 minutes. And Kunigami kept Shidou on a leash for I would say half the match, which means it only took a powerhouse 15 minutes to completely run out of stamina in order to stop Shidou, making man marking him by a singular player a very unpractical move in a real football game, which is exactly why I said this is not truly a real weakness for Shidou, because overall Shidou has always been one of the most complete strikers in Blue Lock. And honestly, he was one of the few that did not improve that much. He only improved on a technical side in the NEL. And that's because I feel like his playing style is almost perfected. Instinctively getting to the best position and then using your superior agility to score an insane goal. That's everything that the demonic dragon stands for. And with him teaming up with Isagi, they are looking as fierce as ever. One of the strongest and scariest duo in all of Blue Lock. However, can they actually beat Isagi and Hiori? For how this matchup would go, I honestly did not expect the video to be this long, and I did not expect it to be this fun to make. I gotta admit, trying to mash different weapons from different players together in order to form a team is rather impressive, and I honestly respected the writer of Blue Lock a lot more because of this. However, enough jabbering from me. As for who is going to be the winner, I am going to break the teams and actually evaluate the strikers against one another first and then the midfielders against one another. Then we will rank in tiers the 4 players in order to get a clear image of where every player stands. From there we can talk about how they work on a team and finally reach the answer. And so when it comes to the strikers, who is better, Shidou or Isagi? Well, I honestly feel that this is more interesting than just saying the Demon King, because I truly believe before getting the fastest piece, I definitely saw Isagi on Shidou and Baro's level, with Rin's Berserker state being the absolute best. However, once Isagi attained that insane weapon, he honestly evolved to the next level. And the reason for that is that prior to Noah's betrayal, Isagi's metavision and Shidou's instinctive play were on the same level. Sure, I would lean towards Shidou because they are all instinctive, but I feel like as a talented learner, Isagi's understanding of the pitch gave him an edge. However, because of Shidou's insane agility, I feel like everything gets nullified. But when Isagi attained this new very rational level, it actually allowed him to even beat Shidou in terms of reaction. As I said, prediction not reaction with the fastest piece. And for that reason, I feel like Isagi definitely became better than Shidou. Simply because their weapons, even though they are different, they are similar in their purpose. However, Isagi now has a clear edge over Shidou. But you see, even though Isagi is definitely better, I don't really see the difference between him and Shidou to be that big. For the very least, it's not as big as the difference between Sae and Hiori. You see, the more I dive into Sae, the more I feel like he was so far ahead from the other midfielders it's not even funny. You see, while Hiori constantly aims for the most perfect spot on the pitch, Sae definitely can do that. However, at the same time, he can aim for any striker, and he even can push any striker to achieve levels they didn't even know they could achieve. And honestly, it's not just that. We can talk about how his dribbling is actually scarier than Hiori's. And of course, we can't forget about the speculative sniper eyes. However, where I think things get a little bit dicey for Hiori is when we talk about versatility. Hiori is very rigid compared to Sae. In fact, Hiori's impressive trajectory is similar to one of Sae's powerful passes. However, from there, the Itoshi Emperor has an arsenal of passing types that he honestly puts Hiori to shame. And for that reason, I feel like the difference between them is really huge. And actually, Isagi himself hinted at that when he told Hiori that he needs to improve. And that whole conversation is just a confirmation to what I just said. Sae is definitely far ahead of Hiori. However, enough about this small matchup. Let's actually talk about how I would rank these 4 players. Well, for the best tier, I actually have a tie between Isagi and Sae. And while I think Sae is slightly better than Isagi, I definitely see him on the same league. And by the way, this is the same league where Rin, Lorenzo and Kaiser stand. However, for the second tier, we actually have Shidou Ryusei all by himself, in a league that fits with the likes of Baro, Bachira and maybe Ryo. And finally, in the third tier, we have Hiori, whom I think is on the level of the likes of Aiku. However, I feel like this ranking and the fact that Sae is extremely ahead of Hiori kinda gives off who is the winner of today's matchup. Because you see, I definitely see Isagi more threatening than Shidou right now. The fact of the matter when it comes to this duo, Hiori is very lacking for him to actually give Isagi the W. And here what I am actually trying to say is that Sae and Shidou will have far more success than Isagi and Hiori. And again, even though Isagi might be more successful at scoring than Shidou, Sae honestly makes things funny because he will constantly feed Shidou far better passes than what Hiori will try to feed Isagi. And so for those reasons, I definitely see the duo of Sae and Shidou to be the winner of today's matchup. However, that's all I've got for you today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thank you for watching.